Well, good morning. Are you okay? Everybody awake? Good. Well, thank you, Paul, for setting the scene. You've just heard a little bit about me. Of course, if I was an enterprising person, I wouldn't start with a presentation. I'd invite you to ask me questions. Because doesn't that happen in enterprise? So has anybody got any questions they'd like to ask me before I start my presentation? I'll be happy to take them. I went along to Paul's IEP and did a presentation on innovation. And one of the students very innovatively asked me, why are manhole covers round and not square? That was the question I was asked by the floor. So, you know, it's quite possible to ask me any question you like. So is there a question? Okay, if not, I'll start. Okay, what I was trying to point out there was really if we're educating and we're helping educators to work with enterprising students, curiosity has got to be a key. And if you were my students and you didn't ask me a question at the beginning, I would already be worried. Because all of my students, you will find, they'll ask me questions at the start of the class. And then that way, we can actually determine what's important to them and how I can tailor my talk or my speech or whatever that might be to their needs, not necessarily to what I think they should know. And that picks up on some of the things you heard just now, that my approach really, what I'm going to tell you about today, is less about what I think and more about what students, my past students, have taught me. Because if we're going to be talking about quality assurance, as we are here this morning, who's better to quality assure you than your own past students? To tell you what you got right, and occasionally what you got wrong, and how you might improve it. So, up on the screen there, you'll see a whole lot of logos, and these are the various people I've been working with over the last couple of years. And I'm going to sort of touch on some of that, just to try and give you a kind of an umbrella view of what's going on, you know, in this sort of situation, nationally in the UK, obviously, and internationally. Nope, wrong one, which is where you learn to push the right button. There you go. Okay, my first failure of the morning. I didn't know how to use this. So you're going to get a little bit more of this from Rebecca, but this is my first sight of it. And this is when we're working in the EU. And we're looking at what the entrepreneurial university might be. Now, Rebecca's going to cover this in some detail. So I'm not going to sort of move ahead on that here. That's for Rebecca to tell you about. But a lot of the things there are talking about the things Paul was talking about. You know, people incentives, business external relationships, the teaching and learning. So for me, one of the questions you might have asked me is what I do. Well, I'm still a teacher. For 2 days a week, I teach in the classroom in Swansea Metropolitan. So this is always the question I ask. But what about the students? You know, we're an entrepreneurial university, supposedly, in Swansea Met. We've got the honour of being one of the highest sort of survival rates in the UK of our students. We had a Wilson review in the UK on business university collaboration. And when we were investigated as a university, we found that per head, we're a small university, 6,000 students, but per head, we're amongst the leading in the UK for student startups that lasted 3 years or more. So why was that? We hadn't done our own research. We didn't fully understand it. So we had to go back and look at some of the things we were doing. So my question always goes back to the students, because I'm an educator. So what I'm going to cover this morning, just to give you an outline, is the UK's educator network, and give you some insights into how we work, and maybe some of your networks might like to take a look at that, and we're always happy to work with you and happy to help. I'm going to just touch upon the UK's new guidance for enterprise and entrepreneurship education, which only came out in September. But I've just been reviewing a conference set of papers for a business school, and I was really pleased to see that 82% of the papers cited this document. So it's already, since September to now, having some impact. I'm going to touch on making that work, that kind of thing work. So in the European work I've been involved with, it's been writing outcome statements. What can we write that students are giving us challenges to try and achieve? I'm also going to touch on and close with some thoughts on what's happening at the UN, where over the past 3 years we've been working on a policy framework to actually support all of this happening. So in a way, I'm trying to give you this umbrella view of someone who, like many of you here, I'm sure, is working in the classroom at one moment and then working at the United Nations, and asked to speak on behalf of educators. First of all, I'll introduce the organisation, Enterprise Educators UK. It's currently standing at 92 universities, and there's about 120 universities in the UK. So most universities in the UK are now members. And although you're not going to be able to read the fine, this is just a screenshot of our website, which is simply enterprise.ac.uk. And we partner with people. We partner with the NCE a lot, because we've got a lot in common. And we put on things like best practice. So there's a range of best practice events going on around the UK at the moment. The next one's going to be looking at researchers and how the research community can be engaged. And this has come about because the members have asked for it. The last one was about, and Maria, you were there, I recall, was about assessment and evaluation. How do we set the students' challenges that we can then grade and work with? So then we've got ones on technology, then we've got ones perhaps subject specific. So the 92 universities have got phenomenal knowledge within them, and we share it through this organisation, through this network. So what's at the core of our thinking? Well, this mirrors much of what Paul said, really. We're looking for, and I'm going to term it the enterprising mind, not necessarily the entrepreneurial mind just yet, because we see this as a stage in the process. The university sector has got a tremendous responsibility, and yet a lot of what we do conspires against the very things we're trying to achieve, and a lot of education conspires against what we're trying to achieve. If we think about setting goals for students, a typical problem is we're setting them our goals, not their goals. So an enterprising university should be thinking about the goals of the students, and Paul has alluded to that. But at the centre of it, we need that business acumen. That's on the right arm of our enterprising angel there. They need to understand the essentials of business, the sort of hoops you need to go through, the sort of understandings you need to have. And perhaps where the business school misses out. I'm representing a business school at the moment as well, the Association of Business Schools in the UK. I'm chairing one of their conferences. And what becomes very clear to me when I go to those conferences is they're talking just about the business. And if we go to other areas, they've got expertise and technical skills in engineering, in science, in art, in performing arts, in whatever. So perhaps this is one of the reasons why we see the sort of things that Paul described. Because if you've got those skills, those specialist subject expertise, mixed with the business and enterprise, then your university is starting to do something meaningful. However, again, repeating really what Paul said, you need to understand that creativity and innovation is at the very centre of that. So if you miss out on the creativity and innovation and the opportunity to develop student innovation, then clearly we have an issue. This is part of a document that I'm very proud to have been involved with. This is the UK's Quality Assurance Agency document. It's one of a number of diagrams in there. And what we did was we sat down as a group. And when I say group, there was a wide range of stakeholders in this. I happened to chair it. But I can tell you it started off, the old expression, trying to herd cats. It was an extremely interesting dilemma to have business people on one side, banking and finance, business schools, high-end academics with years of experience, all coming together and trying to agree on things. The language was a problem, there were a whole number of issues, but this is what we came up with. After about a year of deliberation, and after consultation with 72 universities, these are the things that we came up with. So it became clear that awareness simply wasn't there. In many universities, the whole sort of idea of what the enterprise mind was about simply wasn't there in the staff and in the educators, and certainly in much of the management. So that became our key goal. And then we started to think about this mind and this way of thinking, this approach to thinking. So, going beyond perceived limitations, things like this started to come to the fore. And of course, you need the capability. In fact, those two things sit together. You think and you develop capability. So the behaviors and skills. The one I pick out there at the moment is opportunity recognition. The number of people who say you can't teach opportunity recognition. Go into any creative design course in your university or a colleague's university. Go into any sort of creative engineering department and spot the innovation. The opportunity recognition is actually a subset of innovation. And innovation in many ways is a subset of creativity. And when you see it that way, that starts to sort of open doors to understanding that there's silos of expertise in the universities that we're not necessarily tapping into. So, let's face it, university structures, they don't always help. I'm in this department, you're in another department. Shall we share? No, it's my budget. That's my money. That's my expertise. Yet, good creative thinking actually comes from interdisciplinary approaches. So there's a whole range of things there, the interpersonal skills, the reflection and action, and they all lead to entrepreneurial effectiveness. So this is the term that we started to use, which is the independent self-direction, shall we say, and progressing individual goals, getting to the career options and the business that Paul talked about. So this leads us to kind of a sticky point. If you're going to be in a university sector, yes, we have extracurricular work, and I'm going to mention that in a moment. But if we bring it into the curriculum, we have to assess it. We have to, as a university, agree on how we're going to evaluate and assess these things. So this has come about recently through discussions in Europe, but basically we're starting to say you need to look at assessment through the two eyes, and the two eyes being innovation and implementation, because the assessment strategies are considerably different, although they may merge at certain points. There's a mindset behind them. So in innovation, if you've got an assessment that asks for the right answer, you've got assessment that says, get the right answer this exam question with the right answer, you've already got a problem when it comes to innovation. Innovative people come up with many answers. And the more answers you can get from that particular learner, the more able they're going to become. And I'm not going to go into the neural side of this, but please feel free to ask questions. If you look at anybody who's got any expertise at all in neural work in psychology, this is a physical manifestation in the brain. You can actually see people learning to learn. We know this now, it's science. So multiple ideas generation becomes a very important outcome. The breadth of those solutions, are they actually the same solution, repeated 6 times over slightly differently? Or are they perhaps totally different? And that's where the innovation comes in. So it gives you something to get your teeth into when it comes to assessment. What about that challenging student? The one who always annoys you, or the young child who goes, why? Why should I do that? We all know those children. And our education system takes a lot of that out of our children. So challenging norms becomes important. If a student can challenge you and bring new knowledge to the fore and come up with an answer that you never expected, that's innovation. We need to reward it. Flexible responses, developing things, changing things. Then, of course, we get to the implementation, and perhaps we're a bit more comfortable in these areas. Business marketing strategies, finance generation, sustainability, ethics, the legal side. One of my biggest lessons was having a student come back, and this was about 1999 admittedly, and said, Andy, this course never taught us a thing about intellectual property. Everything you do is generate ideas, and yet you've given us no help at all on making decisions as to whether we should understand, whether this is useful to share or whether it's useful to keep quiet for a moment. And I've just been reviewing an international paper on the enterprising university. Almost the entire paper is about commercialism, commercializing the university. It's hardly anything about education. And all the IP is talking about is the patenting. If anybody here ever tried to put a pattern together? Because I have. It takes years. It's very, very expensive. You have other options. You have design rights. You have trademarks. You've got copyright. Those names, those words don't feature once in this paper that I'm reviewing. And that worries me. So let's just think about what our students do. Let's think what enterprising people do. This is where they start. They think about things. Thinking? Hang on. Isn't that what we're supposed to do in university sector? Think? So they start to look for inspiration. What really, makes them happy? What is out there that they can use? And the student actually isn't quite so worried about whether it comes from the Faculty of Economics or whether it comes from the Faculty of Science. And the creative individual certainly isn't worried about where it comes from. And that runs counter to our educational philosophy of canons of thought. You must, in your essay, cite the important people. Because a student might find an important person from another discipline that brings something new to the agenda. And then we need to reflect. We need to give ourselves time. And in the educational process, this reflection, we know it's important, but the bigger that cone at the beginning, the more you've got to reflect on. So in our educational systems, if we actually sort of think about the big, wide open mouth, grabbing everything it can, the young bird, the basking shark, going on with its mouth wide open, getting everything it can. Perhaps we need to look at our culture. And then, of course, that's the point where we discard what we don't use, what we don't need. And at the moment, that's not going to fit into my business model. You don't really ever throw it away because it might come to the fore with another idea later on. However, that's when you start to narrow down. Now, in the real world of being an entrepreneur, you get to a point at the end of that when suddenly you realize what you don't know. There's something missing from your plan. And you have to start doing that again. You have to go out and find, maybe it's something simple, like I need a web page. How do I get a web page? Who can make a web page for me? And yet all too often, we provide those problems for our students to solve. We don't let them identify them for themselves. And a good educator, in my view, will give the students, leave holes in what they deliver so the students can make their own discoveries. And then, of course, the process continues. And then you seek out those problems and you carry on until eventually. Now, this fits in with the two I's because we've got divergent and convergent thinking. Open thinking, drawing in as much as we can, closed thinking, getting rid of the things. And in assessment, I would challenge you to say that your assessment isn't 9 times out of 10 only about the convergent. Now, we've evolved this a little bit at the UN, and what we've now started to realize is that using current understanding in cognitive neurology and how the brain works, the physical structure of the brain changes according to the way you deliver these things. And if the students make the discoveries for themselves, the best way I can describe it to you is it's a bit like when you get a good joke. If someone tells you a good joke and you laugh out loud, you get that really good feeling. And yet let's think behind that. What's happening is that you're actually putting information together yourself to come to a conclusion. A good comedian won't tell you everything. A good comedian will let you learn it for yourself. So really, if you want to look at the best people at this, have a look at good comedians. They understand these things. So then you get the aha moment when you realize, I need this. I didn't know that. That mental connection is critical. We were talking about artificial intelligence earlier on. This is one of the key things they've discovered. These machines have to learn these things for themselves. So again, I mentioned one little cone. Of course, in real life, it's constant. You keep finding out what you don't know. And you keep then trying to sort of narrow down what you need to know. And that's the life of the entrepreneur. Think about it as a game of chess, a good chess player. They'll have 5, 10, 15 possible moves in their head according to what the competitor is going to do. We have to think that way as well. So going back to my assessment, if you actually put 5, 6, my own students, actually 100, different ideas into that space to reflect on, that helps the assessment. And of course, it happens at every point when you've designed the delivery. If you can put that in there, those students learn for themselves. It makes it difficult sometimes as an educator. You've got to keep quiet when you know the answer. But at least you think you know the answer, and then someone proves you wrong, which is great. So our biggest leaps in the UK that have encompassed all of these thinkings are this QAA guidelines. And I know, I'm looking around the room, I see Ivan here, we're working on it in a project which I'm going to mention in a moment. And also we've got something for researchers called the Vitae Lens. And I'd encourage you just to go and have a look at those. I can put the links up or pass them to you. The Vitae Lens looks at what researchers do and then ties it in to the skills of research. And it's a little bit like the model I just showed you. Now, the big thing in the UK university sector was there was an awful lot of people doing some really good stuff. And unfortunately, it wasn't getting the recognition. And we have an agency, I believe you have something similar, called the Quality Assurance Agency. So rather than bat around the corners and keep trying, this is what we did. We went straight to the Quality Assurance Agency and said, this is what you're missing. So now in the UK, we have guidance for every single UK institution. I was in Scotland a few weeks ago helping them, been out in Ireland, even Southern Ireland in Dublin, because they've worked partway through one of their own similar documents, and it's really well put together stuff. So this, I mean, it's amazed me the impact this has had. And I'd encourage you to think about this yourself in your own networks. Going to New Zealand and having the delegate from China come up and ask me, how can we change our educational system to match this? That was a real moment for me. Koreans coming up and asking, will you come and give a talk based on the UK quality assurance for enterprise education? It seems to be sort of a nice trigger. So it's not finished. Okay, it's out there. It's going to be out there for about 2 years. And then when we find it doesn't work, we're going to reinvent it. That's the idea. It's not a static document. It's going to change. Sort of things that are in there, if you do take a look, it actually looks at extracurricular and in curricular, because students don't live in a vacuum. The students can be working outside the institution, inside the class, outside the class. So all of the things I mentioned about developing the mindset, we've just given a taste, some examples there of how that could work. So business competitions, things like that. Also in the document, there's some help with delivery on teaching and assessment. And we look at the task of the enterprise educator, and we think of things perhaps about being more emotionally engaged. So often in university we try to be abstracted, try to be distant. Yet we all know the life world of the entrepreneur is very engaged, it's very emotional. So within that we've got some general principles, some of the things Paul talked about, external contexts, very much focused on developing the individual and the entrepreneurial effectiveness. If you go into the document, you'll find there's thematic guidance. So there's stuff on creativity, there's stuff on innovation, there's stuff on finance. There's things in there to actually give you some clues as to where you should be looking for assessment. Moving that on, what's happened is the European Union are now trying to help create some exemplars of what outcome statements should look like. So in the classroom, a good university should be really thinking about this, and that is the task and the actual challenges you're giving your individual students. So that's just a diagram just to sort of show you the sort of approach, and it's not surprising. It simply says, attitudes, skills. I tend to use behaviours rather than attitudes, and knowledge, and then it's what's the learning outcome? What are you going to do? How does that align to the learning outcome with what you assess? If you're assessing someone's creative ability, as we said before, you wouldn't necessarily be creating a solution that needs one outcome. So I'm just giving you an example, which is a real example, from a university in the UK called Leeds. And so the student will be able to develop new ways of working that challenge accepted norms and contradict accepted practice. So the students actually have a role to say, I'm going to go against what everybody else says. That's one of their learning outcomes. So to do that, what they do is that they give the experience first and the theory comes afterwards. So the students all get told, try and achieve this, see what you can do, and then we'll sit down and we'll tell you what the top theory people think about this, and maybe you can challenge it. So this is the way the lecture's done. It's very much driven by the experience first, with the theory delivered afterwards. Whereas the tradition in most universities is stand up and talk and tell everybody your knowledge. This is knowledge gathering. Knowledge harvesting is a word that I use a lot. So principles of divergent production. I'm not sure if I'm sort of straying a little here, but you may be familiar with inductive and deductive reasoning. You may not be quite so familiar with abductive. And abductive is where you mix. Again, this is the language of artificial intelligence. It's where you mix things that you think are going to happen with facts. So you try and create the future. It's not deduction because you're adding in assumptions, but they're well-argued assumptions. So the assessment, critically aware, independently prepared, anticipates, accommodates change. Now the students doing this get emailed at 2 o'clock in the morning and said, you know that budget we had? It's just been cut by £2,000. So they wake up in the morning to an email to find that something's changed. Oh, that meeting, it was at 2 o'clock, it's now 1 o'clock. So this is what they're actually doing through a web-based scenario. And that's what they're able to achieve. And it's based on the QAA guidance. So this is a Porthampton one. If you want to have a look at that, I'm sure Sarah would be able to give you some more information on it. One of the biggest problems they've faced already is the students find it too real. It's so different from some of their own experience. So they may have to temper it back a little bit because the students get so engaged, it's so enthused, they think it's real. And then they start, getting emotionally engaged to an extent that perhaps is a little bit too far. So that's what Sarah's reported back so far. We've had something in the UK, I've mentioned it, I've touched on it, called the Wilson Review, and both Paul and I were involved with this. This is University Business Collaboration. And this got picked up by Sir Tim Wilson. And, the assessment approaches for the entrepreneurial university need to change. And he points out this thing that if you actually say to students, your assessment points will be, next June, on the 14th, you're going to have an examination. There's no other assessment. Well, the students get used to and are well practiced in responding to stuff they've been informed about 6 months in advance, a year in advance. However, enterprise is nothing like that. And for example, my students will have to read the newspaper that day and say how today's news is going to affect the way that they respond to their problems that they have to solve. And the assessment is formative in many stages. So enterprise is not realistic. So this response to unexpected pressures and tasks has to come into the educational environment. Because if everything is too predictable and too normal, we're simply not preparing the students. So Tim sort of picked up on that in the UK, and that fits with a lot of the quality assurance. And that's one of the directions we're looking at now. How can we change that culture of education to still be of high quality, yet to make it flexible and adaptable? I recently chaired one of our government forums, and there were a whole range of vice-chancellors and important people there. And we asked the question, where is flexibility and adaptability most evident in your university offering? It all came about with external things like work experience and such like. In terms of curriculum, 1.8% felt that it was the curriculum that was offering flexibility and adaptability. 1.8%. It's a terrible indictment on our universities. I mentioned from outset that much of what I'm telling you is not so much me being clever, but more about what my past students have told me. I'm very lucky. I have about 30, 35 years of experience, and I've got 30, 35 years worth of students. So I bring them in on Facebook. I bring them in on Twitter. I bring them in, and if there's a student problem that maybe I can't answer, one of my past students usually can. My famous story is being told, no, you can't run a new course that's half in the business school and half in the art and design. The cultures are so different. You can't do it. So the next year, and yes, it did take a year, I invited the quality team to respond to my alumni's concerns. And I was speaking to 14 of them the night before. So this quality team was very uncertain about this. I said, well, your quality should be about your past students, surely. You must listen to your past students. And I made a big, strong argument. Okay, you've made your point. Yes, we'll listen. I pushed the button. I had 272 past alumni actually supporting me to tell me that this is the way forward. You must mix up business understanding and creative thinking. And we got the course approved. So sometimes you have to be entrepreneurial yourself to get things done within your own institution. So I'm just going to look on sort of the assessment, multiple solutions, borrow some things from design, consider it in absentia where students have to present in an emotional way, but they're not there. Think about where this can lead. Well, the enterprising mind, again, Paul's alluded to this, so I won't go into some depth, but you know, the cornerstone, the entrepreneur, the intrapreneur, portfolio careers, we don't know what people are going to be doing in 10 years' time, work-wise, and there'll be many, many jobs there, and of course, the social side as well as the traditional business. I'll just close with just telling you a little bit about what's happening in the United Nations, and we're looking at pro-poor countries primarily. And these are the key things. Again, Paul's touched on them. They're not new to us. Educating the educators. Incentivizing. Curricular engagement. Extracurricular engagement. Networking. All of these things are online. And what's more, they're not just looking at education. They're looking at the broader enterprise policy framework for countries. So if you're looking for support, the UN have already got a lot of stuff up there. It went up about 2 months ago. And this is the result of 3 years' work, and there's checklists and things on there you can reference. I've pulled out one project that we're involved with, and Ivan's here at the moment, just to my right, if you want to ask any specific questions. But working together with the EU, we're actually creating a course right now, which looks at teacher development. And we're not talking about teacher development in just universities. Universities have a responsibility to educate the educators. So this is something we're working on at the moment, and to create a 2-day sort of program for creating that and giving that opportunity to teachers. I thought I'd close with this slide. One of the joys of being Enterprise Educators UK is we do help teach the teachers. And I've just been to a visit in a primary school in the north of the UK in Rotherham, Herringthorpe. Their whole curriculum is based on these themes: resilience, creativity, problem solving, communication, and I'm trying to remember, reflection. Okay, if your teaching does not fit one of those titles, you will not be approved to run that particular part of the course. And that's in a primary school, which gives you great thought for the university sector. So thank you very much for your time, and be sure that I'd hope to hear a few questions after this one. Thank you very much indeed.